Please, and I want you to say, please never shortchange what God tells you to do. Never think it's not important, because it is. You could be the thing that changes the course of history. It was time for Jonah to change the course of history, but what did he do? He found a boat and went the other way. Do you know what's interesting? For him to have went to Tarshish would have cost him a lot of money. Would have cost him tons of money to go that far. A lot of money. Number one, which shows you that God takes care of his prophets. They weren't a bunch of raggedy old men running around in rags just begging for bread. I mean, he had some money to be able to afford to pay for a boat that went to Tarshish. I mean, we're not talking, chump change here. I mean, this was expensive. But he went the other way. And isn't it interesting? I want to step on some Christian toes with this. This is funny though. But God tells somebody to go preach something and do something, and then I'll go preach it over here, or I'll go do it over here. Well, I'm doing what you said, God, but I didn't tell you to do it there. You know how if you're in church or something, and God says, I want you to go out and start your own home Bible study. I want you to go out. I want you to I want you to get a group of people together, invite them to your home on Sundays, and I want you to preach. Well, God, I could do that while I'm in my church, and I can have my own little thing here, and it just doesn't work. And you can't figure out why. This is what people do. God speaks to them, and they try to do it their way. I could see Jonah. Oh, God, there's some people in Tarshish I think you want me to preach to. There's some, heathen out there I need to preach the gospel to. God never told him to go to Tarshish. He never said that he needs to preach over there. He needs to go to Nineveh. Sometimes God might tell you to do something, and you say, oh, I'm going to go do it over here. I'm going to do it the way I want to do it. I'm going to do it my way. God says, I want you to go out, and I want you to do this. And it's funny because, God, I'm saying this because it happened to me, where God was saying, I want you to do this, I want you to go to your city, and I want you to do it this way. And it's like, okay, well, God, I can just do this where I'm at now. I can have my own little Bible study at my house where I'm at now. It never worked, So the thing is, when you listen to what God tells you to do and you do it His way, it works. Okay. So now, what's interesting here, and you look at this in Jonah. Now we read verse 1, verse 2, verse 3. Okay, so Jonah says, he rose up to flee to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. It's interesting, it says he was fleeing from the presence of the Lord. Like in his mind, he can get away from God, God's just hanging out there, and Jonah, says, hey, Jonah, I want you to do this. And he's like, all right. And then he runs off. Like, God's like, what are you doing? No, God is everywhere. You can't get away from him. No matter what you do, no matter how you try to run or where you go to run to, God is there. That's the amazing thing. If you're listening here, and you've been a Christian before or something, and you're going your own way, even you go to the most nastiest of bars that you can go to in town and just drink yourself into a drunken stupor. God is sitting right there next to you in the bar. He doesn't leave you. Even if you're in prison, sitting in prison in jail, there's God sitting right there, because He says, even from hell I called out to Him, and He was there, and He picked me up. Okay. Jonah, he runs. He runs away. And the interesting thing is, what does God do first? Look at this. Okay, so he went down to Joppa. He found a ship on verse 3. And he was going to Tarshish. He paid the fare. And he went down into the ship, to go with them to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. And look at what the Lord did. The Lord hurled a great wind on the sea. And there was a great storm on the sea, so that the ship was about to break. I believe that the wind was pushing them towards Tarshish. or towards Nineveh. I believe that God was trying to push him. God had spoken to him, and he didn't listen. And so God starts directing him. Sometimes God will say something to you, and you go, oh, I don't know how to do this. So next thing you know, you're sitting in church, or you're watching some guy preach on TV, and then God's saying it to you again through somebody else. He's starting to direct you. He's starting to, come on, here you go, this is the way. He starts opening doors, and things start happening. Jonah's sitting in this boat, and look at what's amazing. While this happened, look at verse 5. It says, the sailors were afraid. The men began to cry out to their gods, and they threw cargo over, which was in the ship, into the sea to lighten it. But Jonah had gone below the hold in the ship and lain down and fallen sound asleep. I looked up that word in Hebrew, the sound asleep. It means he was in a deep sleep. He's down there snoring. He probably don't even hear the wind and the waves. He's snoring, I just think it's interesting how when you decide to do it your way, the devil will make it very comfortable for you to do it your way. It's always, I don't know why this works this way, but it always ends up being a lot easier just to kind of do it the way you want to do it. The way you're comfortable with. Have you ever heard that before? I'm just not comfortable with this. I'm not comfortable. I heard, somebody was saying, I came into work once. I was talking to them about something, and they were saying about how their kid was sick and what they were going through. And I just said, well, here, let me pray. I'll come into agreement with you right now. We're going to pray that God heals it. Oh, well, I'm just not comfortable with that. And I go, with what? With me praying for you? No, you just go ahead and pray some other time. I'm like, okay, well, I'll pray for you. I said, but I'm thinking, what do you mean you're not comfortable with it? Maybe that's what's going to save your kid. You'll take your kid to some doctor where they shove them full of a bunch of pins and pills and all this stuff that definitely is uncomfortable. When it comes to praying, that makes you uncomfortable. It's funny how when God has a way to do something that might take a little bit extra stress, it might take a little bit of work. You might have to get up a little earlier and pray, or you might have to give, or you might have to go and talk to somebody. You might have to love on somebody you don't want to. It makes you uncomfortable, right? But doing the opposite is just so much easier. Just sitting on your couch and going to sleep is just so much easier. The devil made it comfortable for Jonah to fall asleep. Now look at this in verse 6. And so the captain approached Jonah and said, "How is it that you are sleeping? Get up and call on your God." You know what's interesting about this captain? He's not a Hebrew guy. We're not talking to a Jewish man. You look back about 2 scriptures before, what were the people on the ship doing? They were calling out to their own gods. These are not Jewish men. These are heathen, basically, from the perspective of, the Bible and the Jewish. These are guys that were worshiping, other gods. And here this captain of the ship goes down to Jonah and says, you need to get up and call on your God. Now, here's somebody who's not even, looking at it this way. You got this, you're a Christian. You got some guy that's not a Christian telling you, what you're doing is wrong. Get up and do something about it. Because what's interesting here is that Jonah's disobedience was affecting other people's lives. Would you follow this with me? Jonah's disobedience was affecting other people's lives. And I'm not talking other Christians or other people who followed God, the Hebrew God in the situation. These are people who had nothing to do with God. And he was literally, they were losing money because of his disobedience, because they had to throw all their stuff overboard. Their ship was breaking apart because of his disobedience. And then they were in a situation to where the winds and waves, they were going to bust the ship open. They were worried about their own safety. All because of Jonah's disobedience.